Welcome everyone to Deep Drinks Podcast, a special late edition, or depends where you are in the world. But for me, instead of drinking in the morning, I'm drinking at 8:30 p.m., which is a nice change. So my guest today is Hani from Critical Faculty. He was once a Muslim, once a Christian, and is now an atheist. He's a content creator behind the popular YouTube channel Critical Faculty. And today we'll be talking about divine hiddenness. If there is a God, and that God wants to have a relationship with us, why isn't his existence easily known to everybody? Welcome, Hani from Critical Faculty.
G'day, Dave. How are you, man?
Really good. Stoked to be drinking at a reasonable time, which is nice.
What are we drinking?
Well, I only ask you. So you do cranberry and vodka, right?
Correct, yeah. Vodka cranberry or vodka orange, aka screwdriver.
Oh yeah. So I normally follow the guest, but today I didn't have time to run out and get cranberry juice. So I messaged you and I said, "Can I just mix it with something else?" So I've got vodka and I've got Grey Goose vodka and Sprite Zero, and I also have some whiskey if it takes me there as well. So it's just so nice to drink at night, you know. It's so good.
Yeah. That's to me. Yeah, drinking in the morning is wrong. morally wrong.
Yeah. So I guess let's just jump straight into it. You've got a degree in philosophy, right?
Yes.
And you've also given talks on this. Actually, before I start, let me just quickly share. I watched part of this today. You have on your channel, which people should go subscribe to. You actually have a talk. You gave a talk at a Catholic church. Is that right? On divine hiddenness.
Yeah, it was a Unitarian church in Melbourne. Yeah.
And there was some interesting questions from the audience. I'll just say that much. But this is on your channel. People can go over to your channel and subscribe. A lot of your content is in Arabic. Arabic, right?
Arabic.
Arabic. Oh my gosh, why did I say it like that? So yeah, people can go check that out, and your content is awesome. But yeah, could you give us a simplified version of the argument from divine hiddenness? And for me, when I was a Christian, this wouldn't have been an argument I would have even entertained at all. It would have just been, it would have sounded silly. Tell us why it's not silly.
Well, first of all, let me just give you and the audience a bit of a background, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since the beginning of time, humans have contemplated their existence, you know, and it's such a respectable question, like, what the hell are we doing here? Why do I have these feelings? Why my brain is telling me all these voices in my head? So it's a very interesting question because it sounds like magic. It's like where we come from, and is there a purpose to all of this? And suffering, happiness, food, sex, art, science, rage, anger, jealousy, where all these things come from, right? Why aren't we just like roaming animals who seem to be sort of driven by pure instinct, and we're somehow seems to be like a bit transcendent, like we're reflecting on things, and we feel guilt and shame and things like that. So, you know, it's a very respectable position to be in terms of questioning, well, is there something behind this? And that triggered, obviously, the world to be mostly, the whole world was mostly religious in the vast majority of history, because a lot of questions had no answers, and religion, or that sort of metaphysical thinking, seemed to give readily available answers as packages to a lot of things, you know. But then in the last few centuries, science has started to emerge, and a lot of questions not just been answered, but answered properly. Answered in the sense that you can not just answer them, but actually can use them. These answers carry with them applications. You can actually apply that knowledge, and you can build technology and things that you can actually use. And the departure and the divorce between science and the scientific method and religious aptitude is sort of was widespread in such a way that you can see the practical implications of science. And some people argue that there are some still need for religious and behavior and faith, because it's the consolation. How can science help you if you just lost your little daughter or your little son? There's no science can do zilch. And therefore, faith that they're going to be all right, faith that you're going to see them again in heaven, that cannot be substituted. Therefore, religions and faith has been sort of triumphant for quite some time, and even prevalent to date, even in the advancement of science, because these areas are still a weakness of humanity. And therefore, was the birth of the problem of evil. The two biggest arguments against the existence of God started with the problem of suffering or problem of evil, and there were a lot of answers for it. And I find it to be very, very, very strong and very emotionally sound, but it lacks a little bit of an oomph. That only can be provided by the argument from divine hiddenness, because it does not use emotion whatsoever. There is no emotion element. It's based on deductive logic, syllogism, two propositions and a conclusion, and it's a slam dunk. There is not a thing you can do about questioning the existence of this entity if it indeed exists. So it's to me, it's the stronger of the two.
So what is that syllogism?
Right. Do you mind if I start sharing a couple of things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic, because then I can, the audiences can see it a bit better.
As you do that, I wanted to read a quote that just came up when you said that about, what's science going to do when your daughter is, your infant daughter is killed or something like that, right? Like when tragedy happens. And there's this amazing quote by Carl Sagan that I really love, and it's not especially about that, but it's similar. It says, "I worry that, especially as the millennium edges nearer," so this is 2000, "pseudoscience and superstition will seem year by year more tempting, the siren song of unreason more ceremonious and attractive. Where have we heard it before? Whenever our ethnic or national prejudices are aroused, in times of scarcity, during challenges to national self-esteem or nerve, when we agonize about our diminished cosmic place and purpose, or when we fanaticize, or when fanaticism is bubbling up around us, then habits of thought familiar from ages past reach for the controls. The candle flames gutter, its little pools of light tremble, darkness gathers, the demons begin to stir." And I really love that, because it really paints this like perfect picture of the idea that, like, when our backs are against the wall, people might do things like call out to gods or do things that are not necessarily rational. I know, like, I think there's like grown men who when they get bitten by the Australian jellyfish, the irukandji, I think it's called.
Yeah.
They'll cry out for their mothers. They'll wet themselves and they'll be screaming for their mums. Do they really think their mums are going to come and because the pain is so excruciating? Probably not. But they're just in such a state that their emotions just bring up those memories of when they were younger. So, and I think that's what happens to a lot of people. Anyway.
Well, Carl Sagan is such a beautiful writer. He's I think there was a Nobel Prize for Literature, should be eventually won by a scientist, because there's a lot of scientists who actually wrote beautifully, and Carl Sagan was one of them for sure. So I've shared, Dave, don't you get it loud? Brilliant.
Awesome.
Okay, so this is a very, very simple argument. It starts as follows. It starts with 3 different imagined scenarios. One of them, there is a God who created finite beings, and every single finite being human, is a believer. So there's a God, here God is a G, and everyone is a believer.
Mm-hmm.
So the hiddenness argument is not valid, because there isn't, everybody believes in God. And you could argue, according to the biblical narrative, that's probably the beginning of creation. To talk in Adam and Eve and that direct relationship between God before he cut the ties with humanities. But these were direct presence. So it's impossible for Adam and Eve not to believe in God, because they were actually witnessing his presence, whether they were actually uttering words or whether it was telepathy, and whichever way of communication. But it's impossible to deny the existence of God because they're having a direct communication with God. So therefore, and if the situation continued that way and we haven't exited the Garden of Eden, who would have known? Maybe the entire offspring of humanity would have had direct relationship with God, and that kind of existence or that kind of scenario, which is quite plausible, there's nothing illogical about it. There is a God, and every finite being created by this God is a believer. So that's scenario number one. And then we go to scenario two. Scenario two is there is a God who created finite beings, and some are believers, and some are non-believers. But the non-believers on this instance is they're non-believers because they have suppressed the existence of God. For example, that particular God puts a lot of moral obligations on them, and they just tired of it, or they don't like the idea of the morally demanding God, so they abandon God. So they called, yeah.
Well, they would still be believers, right? They just wouldn't be followers. So they would still be convinced of the existence of God. They would just reject God.
So what happens is it's an accumulative thing. So after suppression of the first few, the offsprings of these will be so divorced from God that they no longer believe in God. They will fall into self-deception that particular entity isn't in existence because it's too evil. And like for us atheists, some believers believe that atheists are people who are maybe lazy. They think the demands of God are too much, and they've deceived themselves into believing that God doesn't exist.
Okay.
Eventually, over time. Yeah. So, but they are called at the very end resistant non-believers. They're resisting God. Mm-hmm. So that scenario is quite plausible, right? And in this case here, God is not really responsible of people not believing. He's open to a relationship, and it's only because of the resistance from those particular non-believers that God has been suppressed and he's been abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
And then we should share scenario number 3. Scenario number 3 adds another category. So you've got the believers, the non-believers, some of them are resistant, but we know that some non-believers are non-resistant. And we know they're non-resistant. Probably we're going to advance the conversation a bit later, but let's just assume there are this category of people that they're actually open to have a relationship with God, but the pure evidence or lack thereof convince them that God doesn't exist. Go for it.
I think, like, to the best of my knowledge, like if I try really hard to think about it, I think I'm in that last category, but I can never be sure, right? I could have fooled myself and I could be in that second category where I've tricked myself into believing it for some reason. Maybe I just love sin too much. I love deep drinks too much, right? but I really truly, it started by truly being that person, the non-resistant. I want to believe in God if God is true. That's where I'm currently.
Yeah, and there are lots of people like that. For example, you're not an anti-theist like Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens was anti-theist. So anti-theism is people who believe that even if there was a God, he ought to be fought because he's the ultimate dictator. So you're like me. There is go for it.
Well, sorry to interrupt again, but I would say that I would have issues with a God that like allowed slavery or allowed or was okay with Muhammad, sleeping with a 9-year-old, things like that. Like I would still have objections. So I guess Is that anti-theism? Because that could still be.
No. That's not because when we talk about theism, we're talking about all possible types of gods.
Yeah.
So Abrahamic God is probably out of the question. Like come on, he's too strange, too kinky. So that he's out of the question.
Abrahamic God is too kinky. That's going to go on a t-shirt or something.
Well, he definitely is. Yeah. I mean, he spies on everybody while they masturbate, so that's one for a starter.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah, and then ignores others' prayers. So like.
Oh yeah, like wait a minute here. I'm just busy with this sort of in Islam they believe the throne of God, which is carried by 8 angels. 8 angels carry the throne of God, and he's on there, and it shakes when an act of sodomy is committed.
Really?
So God is trembling in anger because sodomy and homosexual butt sex is really, really so bad that he gets angry. But then a 2 weeks old being sort of killed on the spot, like in Gaza right now, the roofs of buildings are falling over babies and stuff like that's all right. That's within God's wisdom. Yeah.
There's no shaking of the throne then. But so this is something I discussed last week, but I found out that sodomy, at least in the Bible, referred to oral sex as well. Is that true in Islam?
No. So it has to be anal sex. Yeah, but if 2 men commit that sort of thing, it will fall in a very close category. Okay. Yeah, but not the full. So maybe instead
what about a heterosexual couple that engages? This is such a weird. What about a heterosexual couple engages in oral sex or anal sex? Is that okay, or is it just the gays that are allowed to? Like what? Like if a heterosexual couple had anal sex, would the throne shake, or would it just like tilt?
Well, only if the female swallows, because that would be active cannibalism.
Jesus. Oh, well, yeah, we've both got a fat wild place on us now. Oh, God.
You're eating little babies then. You'll be truly an atheist having little babies for breakfast.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, in Hadith and Sunnah, obviously not in the Quran itself, there's no mention of that sort of thing. But in Hadith and Sunnah, there is talks about, all this weird, kinky behavior. But very much like Judaism, that sex is supposed to be an act of reproduction. Be fruitful and multiply type of. You're not supposed to be a pleasure thing. Today, right. So anything that is, and especially if it deviates from the norm, it becomes a little bit. There are some weird hadith and narratives that talks about when you do certain things like that, Satan is actually having a threesome with your wife.
Oh, right. That's like, because I know that there's a lot of Christian iconography that in Pentecostal churches that like Jesus is part of the bedroom. Like he's part of not sexually, but he's like there. Like it's an act of making love. Jesus is there. Or he's at least part of the relationship. There's at our wedding, we had the three, there's a scripture written out that the three corded rope is hard to break. You can't, like a 2 corded rope is really easy to break. But if you add God in there, it's a Bible scripture, 3 times. So anyway, back to...
go for it.
Well, back to this. So this have you fully described this third group?
So the third group, bloody hell, my wife has added so much vodka in there. It's actually pretty strong.
Yeah, I have to keep topping up.
Yeah.
It was like, I filled this up, right? Hang on, let me just show everyone. I filled this up and it was there to vodka and I was like, uh-oh. So then I filled this up and I've been slowly like keep adding more to try and...
It's cold night in Melbourne and I'm getting flushes now. It's too warm now. So this category, that last category, is a category that puts God in question, because if God exists, that category should not exist. There should be not a single person who's a non-resistant non-believer. And we're going to explain the syllogism then. So hold that thought. That last category is the one that activate the divine hiddenness argument. The other 2 categories, They're fine. The hiddenness problem isn't there.
Well, here's an issue, right? So, okay, no, that would be category 2. I'm just thinking, isn't that great for podcasting where I just think and make noises with my mouth? But no,
that's good. That's good.
The argument around free will, right? So I've heard the argument, well, like God needed to give us free will, but I had this thought a while ago that 1/3 of the angels knew of God fully in heaven, but they chose to follow Satan and reject God.
Oh yeah. Satan himself, and even Adam and Eve. I mean, Adam and Eve, they're speaking to God directly, and they still sort of disobeyed him. So
it doesn't seem to be the case that full knowledge of God changes the free will for anybody.
Absolutely. By the way, I won't be a proper philosopher if I displayed an argument without the objection from the other side, because this is going to be coming. I'm going to be also displaying what sort of objections came from the theists and what is the answer to them. So, to be fair, you gotta, when you present an argument, you gotta also present the other side of what they said about the argument. So I was gonna do that. And then I'm gonna share another. So the actual argument itself. So if you can show it on the screen. Yeah. So this is the hiddenness argument. By the way, it's called the divine hiddenness argument, or the argument from non-resistant non-belief. They're interchangeably used, and it was developed by a Canadian philosopher by the name of John Schellenberg around sort of the early 90s, maybe 92, 93, something like that. So this is deductive logic. If you accept the premises in a deductive logic, so the conclusion must follow, and there's nothing you can do about it. The only way to deny or to critique such argument is you have to attack the premises or find a problem with the premises. So if God exists, there are non-resistant non-believers. There are non-resistant non-believers, therefore God does not exist. So you can attack any of the premises. And you say, well, so hold on a second here. Why non-resistant non-believers is a sign that God doesn't exist?
Well, that's my first critique. Yeah.
So then this triggers because there are subcategories under this, under these premises. First of all, the assumption that God, the super entity, the best personal entity that a person can think of, must be perfectly loving.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're perfectly loving, who created a finite beings, you would want to have an open relationship with them.
Well, I would reject that first premise as being important or valid at all. Like, I wouldn't even go there with that first premise, because I think you can build a pretty good case that, as the ex-pastor of the Westboro Baptist Church says, the Bible talks more about God's hate than it does about his love. So if you're a Bible preacher, you're preaching hate. So that's what sorry, that was a bad accent, but that's what he said. So I think you can build an argument that God, the God of the Bible, is not all loving. That maybe Jesus represented an all loving arm of that God. But for sure, like this God is a God that commands infanticide and slavery, and you can't be all
and here comes the question when you texted me the other day, or like a few hours ago, and you said, what is this guy I'm talking about worship worthy about? And that is the whole premise. If there is a super entity that created the universe, however, it is not loving, that does not warrant worship, unless it's out of fear. So God could have been evil. That's why the final premises would be no perfectly loving God exists. Not just a God, and even the word God is connected to being worship worthy. It's an entity worth of our admiration. But if this entity is evil, then what is the guarantee that even if you do what they're ask you to do, that they don't have like a really wicked sense of humor, where they've created hell, but for the gullible believers to go to, and the funny, sarcastic, dark-humored atheists will end up going in heaven. So there's no guarantee with that type of God, and therefore it's not a God. It's more of a super deity or a super creator, but not a God, not a worship worthy, not a one that you go, I love you, I admire you.
Can I interject quickly and just posit my own version of this argument and tell me why it's not as good? Okay.
Sure.
If an all-loving God, some claim, or people claim, that an all-powerful God wants a relationship with all humans. That God's existence is not evidently known to all humans. Therefore, an all-powerful, all-loving God does not exist. So
it's the same. It's exactly the same. You've gone. The bottom line is the openness, that relationship. So there are a group of people who are not resisting God at all. As a matter of fact, they could have been ex-Christians or ex-Muslims, so they've actually lapsed. They were once believers, so they once believed, but it's just against the evidence. That sort of conviction sort of diminished over time. So the problem is the openness of the relationship. If God is truly loving and truly want to sort of having a relationship with human beings, why are some people are denied of that connection? So you hear about Christians about that personal presence of God and all that sort of stuff, and yet other people cannot feel it or do not witness it, and it's not a fault of theirs. They truly searched everywhere and they couldn't find it. It's not there. What do? They're not resisting it either. They're happy. They want to see a sign. Please, God. I mean, most Christians who lapsed, they told me before they've actually sort of prayed and said, okay, I'm about to do this. If you truly exist, please show me a sign. There's nothing. There's silence. Crickets.
Well, the problem is, I'm trying to play devil's advocate here. I would, as a Christian, I would have said that was testing God. Therefore, God was not going to show you a sign, because it says not to test God.
Goodness, yeah. But look at the repercussions. I mean, I'm talking about like a devout human being who's really desperate. I mean, and this is where we're gonna have to probe the word love. What does love mean? Because once we progress the center claim and understand the subsidiary claims and what it means to love someone, because for us to love someone is to be able to share with them an experience where both parties flourish in that relationship. So God is happy for us to be happy. We're happy for God's existence, and we're sort of witnessing the glory of God, and there is a reciprocal positive energy flowing between the two. And you feel it in normal human affairs. Yourself and your wife, yourself and your best mates. That's what you call love. If your best mates start to testing you to see if you really like him or not by putting some traps in front of you, and you would start to think, does he really love me, or is there like a psychotic situation going on where that person is not really self-assured or having a problem with confidence, and they want to make sure all the time that I truly love them? Because once you have that sort of relationship and the confidence and the trust, you don't keep questioning it. You don't go to your wife and say, can you please pray 5 times or tell me 5 times a day that you love me? Because if you don't say it, then maybe you've stopped loving me. She doesn't need to know to do that. Certain actions, little things, indirect actions between partners and friends show that they care without having them to say, we care. And that's on a human level. So if humans are that wise, how can be the Almighty, the All-Wise, need renewal of vows almost every second? And putting you at different tests. You don't put people at test if you truly love them.
Well, the biggest argument that I hear against this kind of idea is something that I think Jordan Peterson says. It's something that I think Frank Turek said. Like it's the main, and that is, there are no true atheists. There are no people who like people know in their hearts that God exists. In fact, I think the Bible even says that people know that God exists in their hearts.
But what kind of argument is that? I mean, it's not true. I can tell you, it is not true for me. I mean, I don't know that God exists. This is a very strange argument. It's like, and we're going to get to it because actually this has been posed as one of the problems with the premises that people are. It's called the hidden resistance. So people like Richard Swinburne have actually said, and others. What's the other one? Andrew Collison. They actually said, what if there is hidden resistance? Resistance that you're not aware of, like a built-in bias against the, you hear that funny story. You've got a bias against the supernatural. You don't want to believe the supernatural.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's not an argument that there is a God, but you're deep down you're denying it. It's just not an argument because some of us were religious before. I mean, like you believed in God before.
Yeah, well, they'll say, they'll quote 1 John. If they left us, they were never really with us, and it's like, you can never win.
No. Because you know why? Well, you know why, Dave? You can never win with arguments like this because these arguments are ill-defined. It's unfalsifiable. It's like we call it in science. That's exactly the definition of a non-scientific theory that comes along, and it can never be falsified. It doesn't matter how you present your argument. I can find a way that it will render your argument incorrect or not plausible, and because it's very ill-defined concept, it doesn't have any concept to it. It can take any shape or form it wishes, and it have the multiple interpretations within the same idea. Look at the amount of denominations of Christians and Muslims around the world, because religion has made it so that you believe in anything. If you're a good person, here are the good verses in the Bible and the Quran. If you are like kind of weird and aggressive and you like the blood, there are stuff that would suit you just as well in both the holy texts, because it's ill-defined. So therefore I always find arguments like this is just so weak.
Yeah, I mean, I find it weak as well, but it seems like an argument that, like, what do you say to someone who says that? Like, I've heard people argue that there are, there are certain tribes that have been found to have no God belief at all.
Yeah,
like they
true.
just don't have the, and the person, I think Matt Dillahunty brought this up to someone in a debate, and they said no, they still know that there is a God. It's like the inner consciousness or something. Like they just don't know. They just don't put it into like a God perspective, but they have that inner conscience. That's therefore that's God. And
Well, I'll put it simply to them back and say, okay, you're making a claim, right? You're making a large claim, extraordinary claim. I need extraordinary evidence. You can't just claim anything and go away and say, I'm triumphant, I won the debate. If you claim something, like if I'm going to claim something today, I'll make sure it's supported by evidence. Okay, what evidence have you got that I am hiding this? I know I've changed my beliefs on multiple things in life. I became vegetarian. I've abandoned certain thoughts before, and I've adopted new ones. I can show that I've a proven track record of me changing my mind based on solid evidence. So that's all what I can present. I can show that over time I've changed my position on multiple things.
It's one of those. It's an unfalsifiable assertion, isn't it? When someone says that, it's the same as like the supernatural. Like, oh, the supernatural exists, and you ask for examples, and it's always something ambiguous that you can't like nail down, you can't prove.
Yeah, because you know what, you can simply reverse it, and but obviously I will never do that because it'll be quite childish, and it will still be valid. So I can say, well, you know what, I think you're hiding something. And I think you might not be aware of it. You
Yeah.
might know that God does not exist deep down, but you're pretending. Two can play that game.
I had someone actually say it to me. They were saying like, when I think about, and this person was just an average person, they go, we're not when when I think about it, I really get honest with myself when I sit down and I think about it, and I think about, is there a God? I eventually just realize there probably isn't. And I go, I was so shocked because I thought they were going to come around and say like, oh yeah, I know there must be something or whatever, but no, it was it was no God.
Yeah, so these type of arguments are quite silly, but so the syllogism is quite sound. If there is a God, when we say God, we mean a worship worthy God, a God worthy of our love and admiration, and created us according to the Bible. God created us because He loved us so much, right?
Yeah.
And He wanted to have that relationship with us. But if we don't love Him back, He's prepared something, a nice surprise, a nasty one. If we don't love Him back, and that's again, I'm going to pose that particular question to you. Let's say you're 20 years old, you fell in love with a girl, you were brought up nicely, with nice standards. For some reason, that girl, you loved her so much, and she's such a beautiful girl, and you love her spirit, but you end up loving somebody else, right? And or not loving you and not committed to anyone else. Most sane, virtuous, good people would sort of walk away from that saying, well, if she's in love with somebody else and you see her happy, then you're happy for her and that's good enough. Or you just you move on with your life and you be dubbed as a chilled and cool guy. But only the weirdos will start stalking that girl and trying to probably abduct her or torture her. Who does that? So when a human does that, we call them psychos. But when a super entity does exactly that, because why would an all-wise God care what a finite being thinks? It's like, you wouldn't really care. I mean, even like really, really strong humans, when I say strong, I'm saying strong in character, if they get negative feedback on their article, they don't care. They say, well, this person has actually expressed their opinion and they have the right to express their opinion. They don't like my opinion and so be it. So what? But then you find those who are absolutely goes very defensive. As soon as you say something like, how dare you critique my intellect? It's all, and we call that what? A sign of insecurity. How can the Almighty, the creator of all universes, the greatest power that has all been, care about what you have for dinner, what sexual position you've had sex with your partner? It's incredible. It's actually, if there is a God, He would be quite upset that his reputation has been tarnished.
I know, and God's morality seems to evolve with society's morality. Like, as things don't tend to get, the instructions from God tend to get a bit more, acceptable. When you go from the Old Testament to the New, at least, you go from not being able to eat shellfish and not wearing linen of two mixed fabrics as a death sentence to, I don't know, getting divorced is okay under certain circumstances. Like, it's wild. But the thing, this is the thing that kind of bothers me, and I wonder who has the cognitive dissonance, like not the cognitive dissonance. I wonder who has the mental block that's not seeing this, right? Because I read a scripture like Matthew 24, Mark 9, I think it is, Luke, whatever it is. It's the scripture where Jesus is talking about the end times and saying, this generation will not pass away until they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great glory and great power, and He'll overthrow, all that kind of stuff. The end of the world is going to be, people standing here today will not taste death until they see all these things happen. And it didn't happen. 2,000 years later, we're still talking about that. That, to me, that's like okay, either the Bible's not inerrant, or Jesus didn't know what He was talking about, or was lying, or his words were recorded wrong. Either way, there's a problem there.
Yeah.
That's like a case closed. Christianity,
or it depends what you mean by generation.
yeah. And so I always ask someone who says that. I always ask someone about that, and I say, okay, so give me the translation. Translate this so it says, I tell you the truth. This generation will pass away, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and in fact, it'll be over 2,000 years, and then Obama will be elected president, and that'll be the sign of the end time. Give me the translation that works, because this isn't working.
That's exactly how prophecies are made so vague. That's on purpose, so they can fit any narrative. That's how they're designed.
Yeah,
they design them that way.
So yeah, and I mean, and this is what I'll say just on the generation thing. But if you translate it to say the exact opposite of what it says in plain reading, this generation will pass away, and you translate it to mean no, this generation won't pass away, like the exact opposite, then why can we not say the same for everything else? Like, did Jesus drive demons out of people, or did he bring them into people? Did he die on the cross, or did he live on the cross? Like, what, are you just gonna say the opposite of whatever happened? Like, if you can find a way to translate that. So for me, that's the that one thing is like case closed with Christianity, but people don't see it. And the same with this is like the hiddenness argument. This seems to be case closed for a God that wants a relationship with you, but isn't evident to everyone. This is closed,
and you're not resisting, and you're not resisting him.
Non-resisting.
Yeah, because that's very important. If you're not, I'm open, right? Like right now, if God show me and you a sign, so imagine, so God seemed to be showing himself quite often before the invention of camcorders and cameras and mobile phones. How convenient was that? Like he was actually showing and he was intervening. So not right now. So no, hold on a second. God does not intervene because of free will. God cannot intervene. So baby Hitler could have not been killed, because then Hitler would have not exercised his moral freedom to commit evil acts. So where was that moral freedom when God killed the firstborn of Egypt and the Passover? He actually intervened 10 times. The 10 hits over Egypt and there. And look at the resolution. What a strange, wacky, evilish, psychotic. Do you know Ricky Gervais?
Yeah, do I know? I've listened to him all day.
So Ricky Gervais and his best mate, the guy with the head like a fucking orange,
Carl Pilkington.
Carl Pilkington. Carl Pilkington was Ricky Gervais was telling this story, and Carl Pilkington said, "You know what? In his way, I think God is gay." He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well."
What are you talking about?
Yeah. He said, I think he had a hissy fit. Alex, I know some gay people. He had a hissy fit.
Oh, I couldn't believe that. That was so. Oh, geez.
It's so funny.
Yeah, because he pulled open this book, right? And it was like, this is back before. This was his series back in 2000. I know it was before. It was a while ago. And he was pointing to like this photo, these images of God, and God had like big hooped earrings and and he made this joke like, "Where are you going?" He's like, "Gonna see God."
It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But when you think about it, so God could have done this in so many different ways. First of all, he could have changed Pharaoh's mind. One, okay, the guy's so evil, he's long lost. Okay, kill the Pharaoh, right? The firstborn of the Egyptian children, innocent human beings, have no idea what the hell is going on. And this act is committed by God, and this is where the divine command theory comes from. If this act is committed by anyone, that person would be called evil. A Hitler or horrible stuff would be uttered in history about this person. But because it's God, it's fine. Well, we're his creation. He can do what the hell he wants with us.
There was this amazing quote that I saw and took a screenshot of it on TikTok, and it was someone doing like a live stream, and they had a question above them, and it said, "Here we go, I found it. Did the babies floating by the ark have free will?" And I was like, "Oh, that's so brutal and so true, right?" But
it's horrible.
It is horrible. So so the generation thing, that's like, for me, that seems like I'm trying to work out, have I got some like mental blocks not letting me see it, or is it them? And then this hiddenness argument is, am I just not seeing it, or is it like, what's the steel man to the opposition to this argument? Like, what will, I've written down what Michael Jones said in his video on the subject, but I'm wondering, what is the standard objections to?
Well, there are three main objections, and I think I've got the slide for them. Now, just give me a second and share with you the objections. And I'm just hoping that people can appreciate the presentation, because and I'm trying to be as unbiased as I can possibly be. So instead of just presenting an argument and pretending that it's a slam dunk and has never been sort of refuted, or people have no objection, we need to present the objection, and we need to go through the objection and ask, are they viable? This is the hidden resistance we talked about. That what if you hiding some resistance that you don't know of? But this is such a hypothetical situation that is not just valid for the existence of God. It could be valid for anything. So you're arguing with somebody about something, and they come up with their own narrative or argument, and you go, no, I don't think you believe what you're saying. Deep down, you believe the opposite. I can do this with anything. I can do it with food, with your favorite footy club. I can do it with anything. And it's not an argument, so it's a non-starter. You can only argue about what people are presenting in front of you. Saying that, sorry, deep down, you don't think what you think is not an argument. You cannot progress the conversation. It stops right there. So you're going to have to work with yourself. So I have enough respect for believers that when I argue with them, I don't have the audacity to tell them, yeah, no, deep down you're an atheist. I'll be stupid, and that's not an argument. I have to respect their wishes, and they present themselves. It's like pronouns right now. You know, when somebody says to me, "Hello, can you please call me this?" Right? I have to call them that. Not because I can go through the argument of, oh, look at the pronouns and just as a sign of human decency and respect. If somebody presents himself in a certain way, you ought to say, okay, if you want to have a good communication, that is, because you need to pass that point to be able to progress any meaningful conversation. But imagine having to be stuck at it and they and she and on all that sort of stuff where people say, I'm not saying that. You don't look like that's stupid.
Show me your birth certificate. I'm only referring to you by your legal name.
That's ridiculous, because that person might harbor fantastic views in their head. I will be denying myself the joy of engaging with their thoughts because I'm stuck at sort of the stupid first, Not
to mention that it's just scummy, like full stop, but like, to be like this arbiter of truth. Show me your chromosomes. I only, you're a man. Yeah.
And it harbors the inner feelings about the insecurities and people caring for little things. And exactly that God is, or that kind of argument presents the same issue, is the person who's basically have no respect for your thoughts, no respect for what you're putting through, and too lazy to engage in what you're thinking through, and comes up with the easy cop out of, you know what? Deep down, there is a God.
Yeah. It's quite insulting.
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely insulting.
Are these the three main objections to the hiddenness argument?
Yes. So the first one is the hidden resistance, and it's been exactly countered the way I'm countering it right now. This is very open. It cannot be asserted, and because it cannot be proven, and it can be used to dismiss any conversation, not just theological, anything. Where you're saying that you've got a natural bias against the supernatural, you've got a natural bias against God. I can say you have a natural bias against the natural world. You've got an inner bias that you're not aware of, that resists the natural causes and the natural explanation of existence of everything. But I don't do that because it's stupid. I can say you're under misapprehension. I don't think you understand this point. Let me prove to you. Let's chat about that. But to start the conversation by saying, I don't think you believe what you're saying, is suddenly become a shrink and and a telepathist and reading somebody's aura. And suddenly come up with that, it's a really stupid thing. So that has been dismissed. The second one, it gets a bit more plausible. So why would God always be open to personal relationship with finite creatures? Maybe there is a wisdom behind that. For example, the nature of belief. The nature of belief or faith requires that you believe without evidence necessarily. That's how faith works, because if it's evidence based, it's no longer called belief or faith. It's called knowledge. If I prove to you something and it works and it's practical and you go home and try it, it becomes knowledge. It becomes part of epistemology, part of the theory of knowledge, because it has practical implication and it works. So it's no longer a faith. A faith is believing in something without the need for proof. It might be proof, but you don't need it. And go for it.
So what's the counter to that? Because that seems like a relatively sound argument that God wants us to have faith. Therefore, that's why he doesn't show us his he's not evidently true to everybody.
Sure. So now faith. Well, faith leads to what? Faith isn't faith to lead to some sort of knowledge and therefore a relationship with that God? Because when you have a faith with that God, you have a kind of a relationship with that God. And God has to prove in here that something can only be achieved through faith, that cannot be achieved through normal direct relationships. So for example, we talked about Adam and Eve. We talked about the situation where God is having a direct interaction with these finite beings. It did not stop them from practicing free will. They disobeyed God, and they put something else in front of God.
They walked with God in the garden.
Yeah.
They hid from God, and God couldn't find them, which is another big problem.
So what the hell? Where are you? He actually asked the question. Rhetorical, of course, he knows, but he's hiding.
Of course.
So Lucifer, according to the Muslim narrative, he was asked to bow to humans, and he said, I'm not bowing to anybody, which is actually, I think it's quite I think Lucifer is quite admirable. He's a very principled type of person, for a good reason. Imagine God is asking you to worship to find other finite beings, and maybe part of the answer was like, sorry, I will only bow to you. You're the only one worthy of bowing to. So he's actually probably had a point. But therefore, Lucifer knows God more than even humans, because he's obviously older. He's got supernatural abilities to understand exactly what the future means to him. He's probably going to be in agony for the rest of eternity, yet chooses to disobey God. So here, a couple of incidents where being in God's presence did not stop these creatures from practicing their free will. So God could appear, and we still have the same issues intact. You still have to fall in love. You still have to get an education. You still have to find a job. Nothing, if tomorrow we found out there is a God, right? We will be going crazy for about a month or two before the world goes back into normal mode again. We're like, okay, we need oil. We got war. We got all these sort of issues. And by the way, God told me I'm with you in that war, and we end up with the same story again. So it doesn't change anything.
So if I was to nitpick, I could still say that because the Bible says, you go back to the Bible, because the Bible says God wants us to have faith, right? Or it alludes to that at least. I don't know if it clearly says that. But but again, if I was to ask why this, like, why does God want us to have faith? It becomes one of those questions like, oh, he just does. Like, it's just like what, like, why? And it's like, because he likes it. Like, it becomes like a unfalsifiable, like, you could prove that someone could have a relationship with God without faith. They could love God without faith. They could do all these things, but the Christian will still point back to, yes, but God wants us to have faith. And then,
Considering the faith, we know for a fact now is the worst method of reaching knowledge, of epistemology. Because forget about God. Let's say you have faith that fairies exist,
yeah,
or Bigfoot, or alien abduction. Look at the type of person you become. Conspiracy theorists, probably having issues organizing your life, lots of delusions, you know, so many problems. Counter it with the proper method of reaching knowledge. You know, the observation, trial, objective and neutral verification of the method. Make sure it works. Make sure it works by a third party other than yourself. Neutralizing your senses that can actually deceive you, and use other things that will tell you that the result of this test is objective. And then you use that knowledge to build rockets, satellites, medicine, all sort of helpful stuff. What has faith done other than even not just religion? It puts us in a situation. Look at the state of most faithful countries in the world, in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of even happiness, and GDP and things like that. They're having trouble.
I think you have a naturalist worldview, Hanny, because so to play devil's advocate again. So I had a conversation with Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones, a while ago on Deep Drinks, and we were discussing morality. We were discussing the problem of evil and the problem of suffering. And I posed this question. Let's say there's a hypothetical universe where the only thing in this universe is a person and a button that gives $1,000 to charity and a button that gives $10,000 to charity. It's like both of those, let's, you know, although the charity would also have to exist inside this in this box, but let's just pretend, you know, for argument's sake, there's two options: one good and one even more good. No, one of those options is a bad option. There's just one's more good, or one's a greater good. And something that really surprised me is, and you'll have to go back to watch it to get a clear understanding of what he actually said, but and I could be recalling incorrectly, but he said something along the lines of that assumes a kind of utilitarian perspective of the universe, that those things like giving money to charity is a good thing, where he says, suppose that ethics is more about virtue and building a virtuous life and things like that. And then he said, and I said, it got down to the argument where I said, let's say there's a universe where you know, you can build no moral virtue, but there are no children being abducted and abused. And there is a universe, and he said he would choose the universe where there is the ability to get moral virtue, but there are still children being abducted and abused. And I was like, I could not believe that he bit that bullet. Like, I don't think it comes across at like how hectic that is.
Yeah.
But I think like, I'm not saying Michael's a bad dude or anything. I think this is an extension of his worldview, and maybe if you pushed him on it, he'd probably wiggle around that a little bit. Like, but I think that and I've watched his video on the divine hiddenness, which, by the way, if you type in divine hiddenness on YouTube, it's 1, 2, 3, fourth one down here. Divine hiddenness. His arguments are essentially similar. His arguments are that human reasoning and evidence, that one, people, I've listed them, that the video argues that if God provides sufficient evidence, it might not be convincing to everyone. God's intentions beyond mere belief. So the argument is made that God's aim is not just to have people believe in his existence, but to seek deeper, morally good reasons for belief. And I'll just get through these quickly. The role of free will, the video suggests that forcing people to believe in God would violate their freedom and potentially lead to the wrong attitudes towards God. So we've discussed that. Divine need for evidence. Different people have different needs for evidence. The problem of selfish human nature, this part. The video posits that human nature is inherently selfish and prideful, and this affects how people respond to the idea of God. The video suggests that God's hiddenness is a strategy to help humans overcome these tendencies and seek Him with humility. So it's the argument saying, if God showed up, that would soothe our prideful ego, and God doesn't want that. God wants, this is a lesson from God. This is a test from God to seek Him, to humble ourselves and seek Him and have faith without evidence, essentially.
Considering He's an eternal being, and we've never freaking asked to exist in the first place, right? We're thrown at this, right? And we're trying to sort of make sense of it all. And He's an all-knowing. The past, present, and the future exist with Him all at once. And we are sort of, stumbling in trying to sort of sort all our affairs. If it's not religious, it's otherwise social, it's work, it's marriage. Our life isn't easy. We don't need humility. The whole thing is not about humility. And we did display, according to the biblical story, that the direct presence of God did not tarnish free will, because you can have multiple and you've mentioned before, why does God, because this is a Leibniz type, the best of possible worlds, and William Lane Craig talks about it as well. Apparently this particular equation that we're here right now is the best way to express human emotions and devotion and all the sort of things, as if it's a recipe that God must follow to achieve this.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that render the power of an all-powerful being, render that might redundant? Because if there is a certain equation that must be followed to achieve that becomes superior to God's power to achieve it. Because an almighty can achieve that final result in whichever way He wants, including a world where there's no suffering and there are levels of goodness. So you have good, very, very good, extremely good, excellent, super excellent, and still no suffering.
Yeah, Super Saiyan, excellent. Like the thing is too, is this moral virtue kind of idea is a system presumably set up by God. It's like it's putting the cart before the horse. It's like moral virtue is good. And it's like, what is that good you're talking about here? That good you're talking about here is, it's a presupposition. Like you're building. It's all like it just seems to. I'm not a philosopher, as you can tell. I have to use my hands.
No, but it's you're onto something, Dave. But it's been argued. That's called the Euthyphro dilemma. Where does goodness come from? It comes from the nature of God? So He commands something and it becomes good as soon as He utters the word. So save the children, that's good because God says so. Kill the children, it's good because God says so.
God says so, yeah.
Then I'm sorry, what kind of virtue? So to me, ethics is nothing transcendent. Ethics and moral values are things that we develop in societies. That's why they change over time, to engage with one another and ensure prosperous engagement and future for all of us to survive. It's a survival mechanism. There is not, and it's very like there's something called so there's deductive, inductive, and there's abductive logic. Abductive logic is when you have two hypotheses and try to run them by system and see which one will explain the status quo, the data that we have right now. The data we have right now, it says moral values have changed over time. Moral values are different right now as we speak in different spots on Earth because of culture backgrounds. So what's deemed to be moral in Afghanistan is completely different than moral in Sweden. The word honor in the Muslim world is different than the word honor in Australia. So when we talk about honor here, about honoring your word, you're a man of your word, you promise, and things like that. Honor
Well,
in the Muslim world is the hymen of your daughter in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, her virginity.
and
That's
honor, honor, like the highest honor. Excuse me if anyone's offended by this, but in Australia, getting called a mad cunt is the highest honor that you can possibly get.
that's a compliment, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you say and words. Matt Dillahunty once said before, words don't have intrinsic meanings. They have utilities. That word cunt, if it's used in that particular, I mean, it was first uttered in the cinemas by Anthony Hopkins in the movie Silence of the Lambs, and people I remember going, "You said the C word," you know, when he talks about
Oh,
Jodie
really?
Foster.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, if you watch Silence of the Lambs, Jodie Foster was approaching him while he's in his cell, and he can say, I think he said, I can smell your cunt," and it was because he was a serial killer, and the way he said it was quite, thrilling.
Yeah.
But people were like in the cinema then because such a word, but words are meant to be utilities. Like if you use them in the right context, like in Australia, this is a form of endearment. That's like a good mate of yours. Obviously, outside of Australia, they wouldn't understand what we're talking about, but I understand it quite well.
I like, just to something that Christopher Hitchens did once actually, which was, I still my mind is blown by this, and I think I might have even brought it up the first time we chatted. But he was debating some Catholics on with Stephen Fry, who's gay,
I remember that.
and and he used the F slur. He used the like the homophobic slur, and he says but he's pointing out the fact that he's like, no, he's like, the church is saying, no, Stephen, you can't join my church. You're an F slur. You're a homophobic slur.
I remember. Yeah.
And he's like, and it was so shocking because you're like, whoa! But it really brought the seriousness of what the reality actually was. The word is much less offensive than all the LGBT folks that have been hurt by religion, by the Catholic Church, by their doctrines. Much less offensive, but it was still so offensive, and I'm like, whoa! I'm like conflicted, Like I'll look at it and go, ooh.
He meant to be shocking. I think he wanted to shock you. That's the whole idea. He's portraying what the others are saying and what they mean by that word. Because when you say the F word for a homosexual, it's usually because you're denying their humanity. You're saying because you're less than a human, right? But words change. The word gay 100 years ago meant something different. If I was in the UK 100 years ago, I could say, "Hey, Dave, have a gay day," and it'll be understood as a happy. Nietzsche wrote a book called The Gay Science, and it was like happy and cheerful and stuff like that. And it's changed over time to mean something else. And words can change meaning. That word faggot can mean something completely different in 70 years, and it will mean, and it will be understood in a different context. But it's what you mean by the word, and what are you using it for, and what are you trying to say, and what do you imply by saying it, that really matters. Context is everything. So, situations like this where you engage, especially when we go back to that divine hiddenness situation, I don't see why God should be hiding. But then there are other pieces in the Old Testament that talks about God's inability to appear to people, because nobody has seen God and survived. Apparently, you go in flames. Like he'd burn you because he's such a powerful entity. Nobody's witnessed God and survived. Yet he is it Jacob that he fought with or struggled with?
Yeah, wrestled with Jacob overnight or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jacob beat him. So
yeah. So what are the? So do we finish these arguments?
Yeah. Well, so we talked about the openness in relationships. So a sane, loving entity, when they say, "I love you," that means I want to have a positive relationship with you. That means it's a reciprocal, positive relationship where we both feel good about our friendship. So like right now, You're giving me new ideas I'm thinking about. I'm feeling good. I've got oxytocin flowing in my head. I'm thinking David is a good guy. He gets me. And you go, oh, Hanny, actually, he's a smart guy. He gets me. You know, he talks about this sort of. I agree with him. And that relationship, the bond, sort of opens over time. Then you might end up open to me about certain things later on the phone. I'll do the same, and it becomes a solid relationship where there is no manipulation. And it's open and it's transparent, right? And you feel good about it. That's on the normal human level. So imagine an all-wise, loving God. You'd be open to that relationship. But if there are other, you remember we talked about resistant non-believers? If God has done everything from his side, and there are some who want to reject God because of free will, right? He first made that first step by making himself available and open, and they rejected him like Satan did, or disobeyed him like Adam and Eve did, right? But if you are completely invisible and not open to a relationship, at least as claimed by some people who are trying, they're not resisting from their side, but they're blocked. Somehow they're blocked. God has actually, like on Facebook, blocked them for some reason. Click the wrong button. It's like, shit, I wasn't meant to block you, Dave. But, big clumsy fingers, you know.
Well, this just to object again, but this all goes back. I'm just trying to put my brain into the fundamentalist perspective that I would have held, but this goes back into the whole free will argument, right? Because it goes back to the Bible. The Bible says that we have free will. So then no matter what you show someone, if you say to someone, my brain's just wired differently, or they won't accept it because the Bible says that you have free will. I remember having this conversation with someone, and I said to them, you know, if babies go to heaven, wouldn't it be good to just murder every baby? Because you're going from 100% chance of them going to heaven to anything under 100% chance after they reach the age of accountability. So I was like, so you're risking them going to hell. And I was like, you're being incredibly selfish by not sacrificing yourself and murdering your children.
Unless they must be christened Catholic though, otherwise they'll it's a limbo. You know,
get them christened in a few religions just to make sure, because that wouldn't be their choice. So if they got christened in the wrong religion, then it would be okay because it would be your sin still. So that works. So you just get them christened in all the religions. But the point is they just kept coming back with, no, the Bible says that to train your child in the ways of the Lord and they will not depart. I'm like, but like you're going from 100% chance of going to heaven to even 99% chance. Like, no, it says train a child in the way of the Lord and they will not depart. And you're like, so like no one's departed. Like it's just like they couldn't get that past that loop that they were stuck. They were stuck in that like spot, because I think the argument of murdering all your children actually works. Not that I advocate for murdering children. Like you should.
I know. You would actually on philosophical ground you'd make that argument, but that situation with God and free choice and because that's such a lame, because that free will is also used in the argument from of suffering or argument from evil. Again, it's used for that free will is such a scapegoat that everything is put on as if it's the answer to everything for most theists. Free will does not exist. What free will are we talking about? Which free will? Absolute free will? I have not chosen.
But you've moved. I'll let you go where you're going to go. I know where you're going to go, but you've moved back into the realm of non-Bible stuff. And they're just going to say, well, no, the Bible says we have free will.
Oh, I mean, if somebody, if you're going to have this philosophical conversation with somebody, at least you're going to have somebody who can actually engage on philosophical terms and can transcend the biblical text. If you're arguing with somebody who is very, they believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, this is not a conversation to have with them. I'll choose a different conversation. This argument is designed for the intellectuals, not the activists. It's for the philosophers. I mean, like the inspiring philosophy, for example. He's a Christian who would like to think about philosophy. So this is a conversation you'd have with him. But if you speak to Frank Turek, I'll bring Elijah and Elijah and the she bears who tore the 42 children to bits because they made fun of Elijah's bald head. I'll talk like that to that level, you know.
Yeah. And then I'll go, where do you get your morality from? Frank. Yeah. He's classic. Yeah. He's gone down like the rabbit hole like real bad.
Oh no. I've seen his conversation with Alex O'Connor. I think he's changed. He's.
Oh yeah, that broke it. It's like that. Was that like what broke him? I think that was the first thing I ever saw of him. But I've seen old stuff of it. So it's like, was that the one that broke him? Because like he's now like proper crazy, like on at least on Twitter. But I guess most people are pretty crazy on Twitter.
Yeah, like it is, and I sometimes feel for the theists because. Sometimes I wonder how many demons have they got, because they're thinking too much about this. I wonder if sometimes there are doubts that emerge and things they struggle with and you know, fake it till you make it type of thing. And it sometimes worries me, especially those who are very deep into theology, and because it drives you mad, the amount of contradictions. You've got to believe things and their opposite at the same time. I think that will drive people insane at some point.
To be honest, like I don't have a lot of hope for certain people who have used religion as a that's been so important to them for so long. Like I don't have a lot of hope for, because like I have, you know, beloved family members, people who I love, friends that I love, and you know, just thinking of some friends that I know, they're older and they have one of their family members has been critically ill for 30 years, maybe longer, bedridden, and every day it's a reaching out to God and believing that God is helping them through the day, their family, helping them make ends meet, helping them process the emotions, helping them forgive, helping them, all these, you know, these things. Imagine 30 years of just thinking it's okay, this life will one day end and I'll get to heaven and I'll be rewarded for the trials and tribulations. And then even to be able to examine, like to ask the question, you know, I've had conversations with people in similar situations and I've asked them, what would a universe look like if there was no God? I asked this, and they cried. The even entertaining the hypothetical, they didn't know that I think I was still a believer at that stage. But it's like even entertaining the idea that there couldn't be a God was so heartbreaking to them that it made them cry, and they broke down. And it's like I wonder for people, like maybe that's like something's happened to Frank in his life, or something's happened to these people to call it, like it's a sunk cost fallacy. Imagine being part of, for example, the Westboro Baptist Church, which I quoted earlier. It's like, you know, you've spent years picketing funerals of dead soldiers and saying God hates, you know, the gays and all that stuff, and causing so much harm, to come face to face with that and realize, maybe that wasn't right, is maybe too hard for people to deal with. And so they let, like, you know, a lot of them have lost their family because their families leave the church and they have to disassociate with them. And it's like, maybe it's like maybe everything else isn't as important as that belief.
Yeah,
maybe
that's why I don't readily identify with the term atheism. Like I don't say I'm an atheist. Like if you say what are you, atheist might become like number 5 or number 6 in the category, and maybe it's only in the context of the existence of God. But there are other things that I like to call myself a skeptic and a humanist. And then humanists have been superseded by I'm an animalist. An animal here doesn't mean just animal. The word animal comes from the anime, which animated, which is anything that has a life in it, or the sentient suffering. So I now would like to reduce suffering, not just for humans, but for everything that feels pain, right? So an animalist, and I'm a humanist, I'm a skeptic, I'm all of these, and then an atheist. And I'll find myself going back to Ricky Gervais. I recommend people and you to watch Extras.
I've seen it.
Extras is
Oh, yeah, I
brilliant.
haven't seen Extras. I haven't seen Extras.
You haven't seen Extras?
No.
Oh, you
I
got to see it.
just so you're aware, like
Yeah.
you know the XFM show? You know
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but just for the audience, like in 2002, Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant had this radio show, and they brought in they had this producer come in, and they started asking him questions, and that producer ended up being Carl Pilkington, who they describe as like a moron, essentially. And he would bring up these things like monkey news and stuff. It is my favorite. Like, I listen to it. I'll just like go through the whole series and then re-listen to it. Like, it might have like a month in between.
It's fantastic.
And after I got off the conversation with Dr. Robin Welsh, the Bible scholar, she mentioned XFM out of the blue when I was talking about Ricky. And we just sat there quoting like monkey news to each other and like just having a like, it is like my favorite show. If I could do a whole show with Dr. Robin Welsh just talking about Ricky Gervais' show, I just like,
I think it's genius. But then in Extras, it's a series where he's trying to get a speaking line. He's an extra, and every episode is a standalone story with a very famous person, from Robert De Niro to Samuel L. Jackson.
Bowie? Is David Bowie in there?
David Bowie, yeah, that's one of the episodes about the nose, the tubby
Short
little,
little
short
fat
little,
man.
yeah, that's the one. That is the one. But there's one scene where he was trying to. He's an atheist. He always plays an atheist in all of his shows.
Yeah.
One scene where he's trying to date a girl, and she ended up being Christian, right? And her sister has cerebral palsy, like she's have motor issues, and he saw her coming and said, "Oh, she had a bit too many," and he didn't know that she had, he thought she was drunk, and she ended up sitting and sitting next to him and talks about God, and he's been confronted by this girl who said, I think when I die, everything's going to be all right. I'm not going to suffer anymore. He's an atheist. So he could not tell her the truth. He told her, yes, you're going to go to heaven, or you're going to play volleyball, and you're going to do all these things. And he became suddenly a human first. Another one, it's a movie of his. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's The Invention of Lying.
Yeah.
Right? Remember that one? His mother was dying in hospital, and her last moments, and she talked about God, and he knows there's no God now, and then he actually comforted her. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be a very bad taste to take away from certain people the one thing that probably stopped them from completely collapsing in the name of intellectual pursuits. I'll have these conversations with those who can bear them, but there are certain people who I would hide my identity and just become a human first, and everything else will diminish.
I will ask them. I'll explicitly ask people now, are you comfortable talking about your beliefs? If the conversation comes up, are you comfortable with me talking about my perspective on things? Because I came to realize that it's not my job to challenge anyone else's faith or anything, even though I think that the world would probably be better if people were more secular, but at least for the perspective of like LGBT rights, which I'm incredibly passionate about, and just like people holding a true worldview and things like that. But this is something that I brought up when people were arguing about same-sex marriage plebiscite, right, in Australia. No, you're in Australia, you know this, right?
Yeah.
I would say I was a Christian. I was a deconstructing Christian at the time, and I said, in what way is there anywhere in the Bible that says to create laws around our religion that the rest of the world has to follow? I can only see that being a bad thing for people converting to Christianity. I can only see that making people more like against the idea of turning to God, right? Because they're like, screw the church. The churches won't let us have rights because of their beliefs. And I think it's the same with getting someone to think critically. If you just come in when they're not ready to examine their beliefs, examine their faith, and you just start like dropping like bombshells on them, like slavery or whatever, Like, even I got stopped by a street preacher who was telling me stuff, and I asked to politely leave, and they said no, and or they didn't say no, but they just kept talking. And I said, I'm not comfortable with this conversation. I'd like to, and they just kept talking and wouldn't just kept like talking to me. And I think I asked twice, and then I said, all right, well, that's it. Like, I'm going to take off my boxing gloves. And I said,
it's almost like
even then I asked for permission.
Yeah, he sees you.
I ask you tough questions about you, and they go, yeah, sure. And I said, how do you get around things like slavery? What do you mean? And you were in it, you know. I won't tell you what happened, but I will say that as it ended, she's screaming at me, God's going to harden your heart, as I'm walking away. And I'm saying, he must have already done it. And then, like, you know, and she was like shaking and like just like, you know, it was
it's almost like voters. Like, he sees you as a piece of meat, you know, like, this is a guy I can convert so I can increase the number, the flock. He does not see you as Dave, a person with dreams and worries and concerns, a full person that has so much to offer and so much to understand. He doesn't see you as that. He sees you as a number, a voter. You know, vote for the big orange man up the sky, the Trump of the universe.
Well, she was actually a little lady, probably in her 40s, and she came up to me, and I will tell you what I asked her. She came up to me and said, I used to be bulimic. I used to this, rah. God saved me. God helped me. You know, I haven't been bulimic for 15 years, and this, and like had all these like this amazing testimony. And when I asked her, you know, can I ask you about your religion? After I said, you know, and she goes, yeah. And I said, wow, that's incredible testimony. I said, so would you say that's evidence of that your God, the God that you believe in, is true? And she said, yes. And I said, well, probably in less strong words, but she essentially goes, yes. And then I said, okay. And I said, hypothetically, let's say a third person came up into this conversation, and they were a Buddhist. And they had very similar experience to yours, but they attributed it to Buddhism. Would that be evidence of Buddhism? And like this just spun her out. Like this was like, it was like, she was like, oh, Buddha's done nothing for nobody, and rah, rah, like, and just like got real angry. And it's like, oh, I think hit a nerve, because it's true. Like if something's supposed to be so convincing, whoa, that's amazing. This is like she's painting it like this is undeniable proof God exists. This is all true and perfect. And I go, and just the question. So if someone from Islam came up and had a similar experience, and it just like, because the answer has to be yes, or it has to be that their evidence isn't good enough to justify belief in that one particular religion.
Yeah.
So
and I apologize if I likened God to the character of Trump, but I couldn't help the similarities, because Trump would say to you, and I've done this and it was tremendous, you know. But then God said in the Bible, and God created light and thought it was good. So he's like patting himself on the back, you know. So I see the similarities, because to me, this has been introduced as the wisest possible being. You know, there are some verses in the Quran, I mean, we discussed this in a previous conversation, and in the Bible, that you would think, God said that? God really said that? You know, the woman who is intervening to stop a fight between two guys and touch the genitalia of a man by accident. What was God on to come up with that? Why would the woman be punished for that?
You know, well, yeah, it's like, did God make it up, or did two like prominent people have a fight, and the wife would always come in and grab the other dude's nuts, like, and be like, all right, we need to create rules about this. Yep, God said it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is it? Like, it's like when you look at the God of the Old Testament, especially, it's like, what is the God of the Old Testament? He feels anger, he feels jealousy, he feels love, he feels hatred, he feels all the things that humans feel. We weren't created in God's image. He was created in ours. Like, of course, like, God's going to feel jealous. God's going to love the smell of the aroma as we burn offerings to him. Like, it just, does God have nostrils now? Like, does God have the same, you can probably tell me, like the whatever nerve endings are in the nose that are required to smell the physical particles that, and how high does this smoke go? Like, does it reach space?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Does God need a physical brain? Like, is this like, at what stage do we just go, okay, this seems to be that God was created in our image, not the other way around? Like, it just seems.
Yeah,
To me, not
it
true.
seems a god like is not even a sane human being, like somebody with bipolar or some like needs some a dose of lithium to stabilize his moods. Is definitely not a sane person, as if he's gone through the trauma. And maybe and some philosopher contemplated that. What if God truly existed since eternity and gone mad with loneliness, like absolutely mad?
Mm.
You know, it's a possibility. Why not? It could be a super entity that's been since the beginning of time, seen it all, and it became so detached from reality and not feeling anything and just like gone nuts, rogue, crazy.
Yeah.
Is that a possibility?
You know, I think this divine hedonist thing works if you just assume a very different God to the biblical God, like a God that just doesn't give a shit about people, a deistic kind of understanding of God,
Yeah.
uh, or maybe like polytheism, and this kind of like we're at time that I still only to keep it for 90 minutes, but and I think I did ask you this the first time, but I've forgotten your answer, and I'll ask you again. Like let's imagine a God that would work for divine hiddenness. Like what God would you believe in? Like
Oh,
like
the
what's the closest? Like let's say there's a magic genie. You rub the lamp, he pops out and he says, "There is," and you go, "Is there a God?" And he says, "There is a God. It's one of the gods that we know about in on Earth vaguely, um, and that one's true." Bye, and then just disappears. And you know it's true. You know that one of the gods is true. Which God would you go for? Like which God would you put your money on?
not my money on, but I'll prefer to him to God of Spinoza
No,
will be the
not prefer.
closest.
Like not. No, let's not go prefer because prefer is like yeah.
Oh, well,
You need to
okay,
really
God of Spinoza. He'd be the closest.
okay.
which
What's
is which is God of Einstein, same God of Einstein, God of Spinoza, which is not a god. So Spinoza was is a philosopher who's introduced pantheism, right? And he was a Portuguese, originally immigrated with his family to Holland, and was excommunicated from the Jewish synagogue because he was a heretic. And he introduced a god which was adopted by he's almost like the god of the philosophers and god of the scientists in particular. That god is not a god, it's not a personal god. It's the oneness of existence. It's everything. It's an all-encompassing. It does not hear prayer, it's not pity. It's the rules of physics. It's everything that makes sense. It's the uncompromising gravity and quantum mechanics and all of that. So that's why it was Einstein's favorite god, because it's not really a god. I think Spinoza was such a genius, absolute genius. He knew he existed in a world where they must have a god. So he introduced a watered down version of a god that is declawed and detoothed, like he doesn't have any sort of the claws and the teeth of the Abrahamic God. So people can still have their God because they must have one, but it's one that does not have an implication of you should do this to the other people. You should kill the Amalekite. You should kill the non-believers, like in Islam. It's a God that encourages reason, thinking, and empirical evidence. So to me, it was a genius maneuver from Spinoza to offer a substitute for something that humanity could not recover from and could not abandon at that point, but in a way that can make sense, because we're talking about the existence, we're talking about space-time, the canvas of existence. And if there is such a thing, maybe that's it. It'll be the closest thing to a super entity for me, because it's not supernatural. That God isn't supernatural. It's just existence.
it's just like a it's like God does not play dice with the universe. It's like it's yeah, I know what you mean. It if I had to twist your arm and make you choose a traditional Hindu, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, like a flavor of the Buddha. Well, I won't let you go Buddhism, because it's non-theistic. But like, have you ever thought about like an Eastern kind of Hindu? I mean, you've tried Christianity, you've tried Islam. Have you
Oh,
tried Judaism? Have you tried
Jainism.
Buddhism?
Jainism, I quite like.
Ooh.
Yeah, the Jain.
Yeah.
It's the most peaceful religion on earth. They put a piece of cloth on their mouths so they won't swallow a little insects by mistake, and they keep sweeping under their feet. They're just so peaceful. They still come with a bit of issues because reincarnation is there. It's not as bad as the caste system in the Hinduism, which leads to racism and stuff like that and social discrimination. But it's a lot better. Yeah, it's not a bad one. It's more of a philosophy as well, as you know.
This has become stoner talk an ending, but and I will wrap up. But if you had to put, like, if let's say if one of them was true, reincarnation or an afterlife, what would you say is more plausible?
Well, reincarnation plays by a little bit of rules, which is that energy is not created and does not get destroyed, but whether the consciousness
Yeah,
is retained. You know,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
your atoms, when you decompose, your organs and everything will actually go back to Earth. That's scientifically proven. Like you will
yeah, yeah.
recycle, but whether the consciousness persists or not, that's the question. But it's the
Yeah,
closest thing.
and then yeah, you'd have to like that. The whole consciousness problem isn't really solved, So it's like, so
Who knows? Who
I'd put my
knows?
money on reincarnation as well, but I still don't think there's enough evidence to warrant belief in either. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
it's a difficult, but it's one of the things that I would like to sort of recommend fellow skeptics is just be a little bit open minded. But according to Lawrence Krauss, not too open that your brain would fall off. So just a jar, a little bit of jar.
and with that, let's end the interview. And if people want to see you interview Lawrence Krauss, how many times have you had him on your channel?
5 times, and I think he's coming for the 6th time in January next year.
What an absolute like that is so cool. So go check your interviews out with Lawrence Krauss over on Critical Faculty. Links in the description down below. Thanks everyone for coming out, and I appreciate all the comments. It's been nice to see everyone here at a very different time. So I can't believe, for example, Carrie, that you're still up. I think it was what you're saying is 5 a.m. before, and you're off to bed. So that's amazing. But thanks everyone for coming out. It's been a real pleasure.
Cheers, Dave. Thanks, everyone.
See you later.